Good afternoon. My name is Christina Strassfield, and I'm the Museum Director and Chief Curator. We are delighted to welcome you today to today's conversation between Ugo Rondinone and writer-curator Bob Nickas. Before introducing them, I would like to make a brief moment to thank our exhibition sponsors. Our lead sponsors, Dorothy Lichtenstein, Fern and Leonard Tessler, and public funds from the Swiss Arts Council Pro Helvetia. Our sponsors, Zeal and Helene Feldman, and our co-sponsors, Bloomberg Philanthropies and Ophelia and Bill Rubin. Museum admission is always free thanks to Bridgehampton National Bank and Landscape Details. Special thanks to Barbara Gladstone and the Barbara Gladstone Gallery. We would also like to acknowledge Caterina Pompilio, the Deputy Consul General, and Cynthia Kuntz from the Consulate General of Switzerland, who have joined us here today. I'm going to introduce both Bob and Ugo. Bob Nickas is a writer and curator based in New York. Bob has organized over 100 exhibitions since 1984. He was a curatorial advisor at PS1 MoMA in New York between 2004 and 2007, where his exhibitions include Lee Lozano, Drawn from Life, William Gedney, Christopher Wool, Into the Night, Stephen Shore, American Surfaces, and Wolfgang Tillmans, Freedom from the Known. He served on the team for the 2003 Biennale de Leon, Greater New York 2005 at MoMA PS1, and contributed a section to Aperto at the 1993 Venice Biennale, and collaborated with Katie Nolan on her installation for Documenta 9 in 1992. He is the founding editor of Index magazine with publisher Peter Haley. He is presently at work on a book about Ed Reinhardt's photography. We are so privileged to have Ugo Rondinone with us. For over 25 years, Ugo has been developing a variety of media, from painting, graphic design, sculpture, and photography to video and audio. His work is often based on themes and motifs from everyday environment, the sun, moon, light bulbs, masks, trees, etc., that acquire a poetic dimension by being isolated, expanded, or given a specific material treatment. With respect to their form, his installations contain diverse references to the history of art and popular culture. His work varies from landscapes drawn in India ink, reminiscent of Romanticism, to rainbow-colored sculptures that refer to the psychedelia, to optical sun paintings and shimmering sun sculptures. We're going to welcome Bob and Ugo, and then we'll have a conversation, and it'll be open to questions at the end. Thank you.
Sunny Days. It's a show in 3 parts, and I think we should start with that way, I guess, the first room or the last room with all the children's drawings. And that's what really drew me to this project, because you've done this before numerous times, working with local children in different cities, different countries to produce drawings of the sun. All these drawings, if you don't know, were done with children on Long Island. And I mean, it's just a beautiful, joyous room. And but there's also been projects with children doing drawings of rainbows, so suns, rainbows, very iconic, also easy for children. And but that's my first question, which is a question I used to be afraid to ask artists, but I was always curious. Do you remember making drawings from an early age, and do you know at what age you thought to be an artist? I didn't warn him that would be the opening question, but let's see.
I grew up in a working class, Italian working class in Switzerland, so we didn't have really that background. The village was 6,000 people, so the biggest event was the circus coming once a year.
What?
So the biggest event of the year was the circus coming in town.
Okay.
So that was probably my biggest cultural background to achieve that.
So as a child, you didn't have any idea about art, or I would one day be an artist?
I remember a situation in kindergarten where I could spot good drawings, and I would pay a girl or a boy for that good drawing in exchange. So I would spot the good drawing. So I had a connection to art or to visual,
Yeah.
to visuality.
Where did the idea come from to incorporate in exhibitions drawings by children? And the first time that was done, and where?
It was done in an exhibition in Leuven, that's in Belgium.
Yeah.
And I was showing there a group of birds that I did out of clay, very primitive, and then cast in bronze. That's how the show started. So I wanted to end the exhibition with something as basic and primitive as well. But so that's where the idea came from. And Leuven is a small city.
Yeah.
So I wanted to involve the whole city. So I decided to have a workshop. I was there for a week, going from school to school, making those sun drawings, and that's how it started. And some of them are here now as well. And then later on, I did the same thing in Mexico. So it's a work that started 2013, and it's meant to be accumulative and going
And
on.
also Shanghai?
In Shanghai, there was the rainbow.
Rainbows.
Yeah.
And in each city, you meet the children. They meet you, and you have, because you have workshops.
I do workshops. We did children's openings.
Yeah.
So it's always a happy event, and I hope we're going to do it here as well, as soon as those children are back.
Next month. And what are the workshops like? Oh, we should also say the ages of the children. They're from 6 to 12?
Yeah.
Because
more or
after
less,
that, it's all over. They're teenagers. There's no way you can get them to.
They are excited in that age. I mean, even a 2-year-old could participate, but
Yeah.
most institutions have a children's program from that age group. So.
And then the other room on the other end are the sun paintings. We're seeing some of them projected here. And you've done them since, what was the earliest one, 94?
No, in 91. I started two groups of paintings in 90. There was landscapes paintings and sun paintings, and they looked very different. So the landscape looked like 1700 landscape drawings. So they had a nostalgic view of the world. And in the same time, I would do the sun paintings. And that formal distance of those two groups gave the whole work a certain dynamic and a certain freedom that I established. So, but this was the basic.
Yeah. When I saw the sun paintings the first time was in 96 in Geneva, the Centre d'Art Contemporain. And maybe because of my interests up until that point, of course, I saw them very related to op art and to 60s. But I don't know that that's something you were necessarily thinking about, or I don't know, where did they come from?
So both groups, the landscape and the sun paintings, were about looking.
Yeah.
So where the landscape was about looking out, as I did them in small sketches in the woods. And during spring, summer, and fall, so I needed an activity in the same way, like I did the landscape. So I started automatic watercolors. So it was the contrary of the landscape, looking inwards, but something where I don't have to start thinking. Like when I did those landscapes, I would just make an effort to do it as accurate as possible in that 1700 style, but not something that I have to think about. Once I have trained myself in the style, and the watercolor would be the same thing. And then when it came out to organize them, I decided not to show the original sketches, keep them private. Back then, I mean, it was in '91, there was not really a market either, but back then it was a form of protecting myself and telling myself that I'm not for sale, so I would keep them, and I still keep them, and I would translate them by blowing up the landscape and blowing up the sun paintings with different techniques. So the landscape were done with Japanese Japanese brushes and ink, and some paintings with airbrush. So it was also a distance way using material.
And two very opposing ways. I mean, airbrush,
Yes.
ink, old 17.
Yes.
You bring something up that's interesting that I think, because I don't know how familiar people are, but there's a lot of variety over years in Ugo's work. And you mentioned landscapes, the suns, there's sculptures, there's outdoor pieces, these paintings that look like they're coming from 60s op, special projects that you do, like the drawings with the children, but a lot, and there are figures, there are clowns, there's, and we don't know what's coming next, but what connects a lot of your work to me is this aspect of time and looking. So for example, the titles of these projects with children are important. Reading from my notes. You know, you wouldn't say, oh, sun drawings, rainbow drawings. These were, oh, that's a blow up of, and that's woven. That's from a children's drawing. It's gone already. Your age and my age and the age of the sun. And then the rainbows are your age and my age and the age of the rainbow. And that shifts things because I think you're creating this kind of circle around the artist and these children who are creating these drawings. It's kind of a bigger world. So it's not just this aspect of time, which I think is really important to your work. The titles, by the way, of the sun paintings are also kind of dates. I don't know if you can explain that. But this kind of generosity of this bigger world, or the sun shining down on everyone. What are the references in those titles in the sun paintings that relate to time?
So the paintings have a title of a date. That's a specific date when I did this watercolor. So it's a diaristic note. And when I started them, I started the landscape first. And this was a reaction of my first boyfriend who died of AIDS in '89. And as a gay man back then, it was like a death sentence that would occur to me. And this made me decide to quit the studio. And back then, I thought I would just spend the rest of my life enjoying the life.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to the woods, making those drawings. So you have time, and what it shows in the painting or in the landscape, it's a space. So you have those two forces, time and space, that would continue with the next group of paintings. So the next group was the star paintings, and then came the cloud paintings.
It's very much a natural world.
But you had always these two forces of time and space. So you have always a very flat image that invites you to go in.
Yeah. I want to mention also here you might think that all of the sun paintings are bright, very luminous like the sun, but they're also very dark paintings. And the paintings come out of a difficult, dark time. But somehow, from that point, there is a lot of this embracing of the natural world, the clouds, the sun, the stars, the landscape, being in the world, and this idea of wanting to experience everything. So it becomes something, positive and affirmative and generous. And I think that has a relationship to this going around the world, organizing, orchestrating these shows like this one, and working with children.
I mean, now in this show, especially, it's a light and sunny exhibition, as it says. but in the same time, the work includes also a very dark side, that it's in the total of the work, not in that work, but when I do something light, there's for sure also something that triggered something dark.
How on the dark side?
Or a basic side, or the night side, or
Yeah.
so I wouldn't value in that way saying light or dark. So whenever I trigger something light, I'm sure the subsequent work to continue would be maybe a dark work, or if I do a very colorful work, that would trigger a very sober work next. Just to keep the values open.
Yeah. And in the center room, between the two rooms we've described that you've seen, are the sun sculptures. And these are dormant, right? There's nothing growing at the moment, so there's also this idea that that's coming. No?
What do you mean
The
by
sun
dormant?
sculptures.
Yes.
That the branches are in a dormant state.
I mean, they are cast bronze, so of course.
No, but I mean, but the objects that you've cast,
Yeah.
they're not really growing. They're in this in-between state.
I mean, it's hard to cast a living thing, so I had to take the leaf out.
Okay, we don't have to talk about that.
No, I would like to answer. What is the question?
Oh, okay, I'll try to make it a question. I
No,
think
what
you
the
see it. I think you
special
see
thing
it.
is, of course, that they are formed in a perfect circle, which doesn't exist in nature in this way.
But also,
So that was more important.
I think people have gotten this. I think you see it here, which is I mean, when you see these outside, you see that whole world. You see the trees, and you see the landscape, and you see, in this case, you see a big lake or pond. Everything is green and growing. So this has this. It's not green and growing. And in a way, when you see it out, when you see them outside, of course, when you see them in a gallery, they're sculptures. But when you see them outside, they become these kind of viewfinders. You're going to look at this, but I think you're also saying there's something beyond. There's something else to be looking at.
I mean, here is the picture. This was the first time it was shown as sun, and it was triggered to the invitation from Versailles to do a sculpture in front of Versailles. And that triggered that specific group of sculptures. So it was a view to this castle.
Yeah.
And those are enlarged. I mean, it's the big sun. It's an enlarged version what you see in the gallery here. So they are vine branches formed in a full circle.
And the titles of these, they're all times of day. The sun sculpture. So it's the sun at 2:15 p.m., the sun at 7:30 p.m., the sun at 11:30 p.m. So there's a way, I think, that you're saying they're located in time and space, the way the sun paintings are. And this seems important to you, this aspect of they're in the world at a certain time and place.
It goes back also to how I organize a work that makes it easy to repeat the work.
Yeah.
So when I decided to have them dated, those paintings, it gave me also the reason to continue them, as I always, or sometimes I couldn't understand why an artist is continuing a certain group, and the date would give me this excuse. And the same goes now with those sun sculpture. If I give them a title of a time, this can go on for a while, right?
Well, yeah, and in addition to that, there's also the idea that every artwork becomes this kind of marker in time, that this is where it's from, and this is... and you always work in series? You've always worked in series?
I mean, it's interesting to work in series because you get better on what you start doing. So.
Yeah, because I don't know if one individual work and then you go from that one work to something completely different. There's always a sort of sequence, one leading to the next.
Like the sun paintings or the landscape or all the painting, because they have a date, they were meant to to continue endlessly. But then, like the last one, those ones, they were done in 2012, and they decided it's over. And that gave me space to develop a new group of paintings.
How did you decide it was over?
By saying so.
Sometimes, I mean, it's not easy to be an artist, but sometimes it's great because you make the rule, you break the rule, and
it was good in the sense, of course, I would be still curious how they would look now, because they do change over time. But it gave me space to develop new works.
Yeah. One thing you're very good at, and either it makes it easy for a curator or it frustrates them, which is, I think that you really orchestrate exhibitions very well. These are the works, this is what will be shown in this, the way you orchestrate even movement from one room to another, and even organizing. You don't see it so much in this show, but other shows, like maybe more survey type shows, where you bring into the mix very different types of work. And so in a way, you're like a lot of curators, a lot of artists I like, you're almost your own curator. You know what you want, but it's this orchestrating of different works in an exhibition setting, which to me, someone might think, oh, it's like a control thing, because I've worked with artists like that. They know what they want, and I have to kind of sit back and let it happen and engage when and where I can. But with you, I think it's a little bit like, I've done all these works, and now I want to see them. I want to see how they perform. I want to see how things, the spaces between them, I want to see how people experience them. So how is that, would you say, because you work on a lot of shows. I'm always impressed by how many shows you're doing, one and another and another. Seeing your work out of your studio and orchestrating these exhibitions. I mean, you must enjoy doing it. You do it well, you do it a lot.
I mean, in the beginning, people would say it looks like a lousy group show because of those different media.
Yeah.
And like 25 years ago, now it's almost a given that shows look like that, like lousy group shows. So, and now I would never combine in the same room sculpture and paintings, because once you look at it on a painting, you would just trip on a sculpture. So I like to separate them. So, but it does it's fun now. Once you accumulate 25 years of works, it's much easier to organize them.
Yeah.
So it's much more fun now, and like here, I just decided to bring in very basic drawing, sculpture, and painting, so there is no sound involved or other media. So but that's the fun now, that I can really play around and form. But they still should hold by themselves and not they shouldn't just work in this enclosure of a gallery situation or institution. So here, for example, was I would bring in the paintings who have, or for me, a certain spiritual engagement with something ordinary of a group of sculpture, which I called still lifes, and I would cast ordinary
apples,
fruits
pears,
and vegetable, and cast them in bronze and fill the hollow with lead, just to have the notion of heaviness. So the ordinary and the spiritual engaging with each other.
We don't have images of shows like that, but you've also, I don't think we have, you've also had shows where there were sculptures of birds on the floor, and then paintings on the wall as if they had kind of It's a little bit like trying to bring the natural world in and bring something that's immediately recognizable, representational, into the gallery, but then you've also really disturbed that because you've had figures in the gallery, and they're not figures at all like a mannequin type, well, almost like a mannequin in some cases, like the women kind of leaned against the wall, You showed those at Gladstone. But when I mean disturb it, you've had shows where you walk into a gallery and you have the paintings on the wall, and then you have these clowns figures that have kind of like, they're sleeping, they've kind of collapsed against the wall. I've never asked you where they came from, and probably the most disturbing, you had an actual person at City Hall Park, you remember this? And dressed as a clown in the middle of the afternoon. And I remember when I went there, he was taking a nap on the bench. And it was really like a complete, this real interruption of reality. And I never asked you about that. I don't know where that comes from, but bringing this figure, whether as an object or a performer, into a situation that's completely unexpected.
I mean, the clown is known as an entertainer, and the first time I introduced the clown was in '95, after I did a cast of myself in 3 different passive positions, sitting, leaning on the wall, and lying on the
So
floor.
that's always you.
That was always me.
Yeah.
It was a cast of myself.
Yeah.
And that notion of passivity continued with the clown, where I cast 7 heavy-set men. This was in 2000, representing the weeks of the days, and they were passive, so laying or sitting on the ground, just not fulfilling their role as an entertainer. And that gave me the possibility also just to have my freedom. Not once you're active, you are for something, and passivity gives you the freedom just to stand off and observe. So it was a kind of a protection, the clown figure.
A
for me.
protection. It makes me think about you not having, art when you were...
The important thing is that the clown doesn't do anything, and so he doesn't fulfill the role that he should do as an entertainer.
Yeah.
And this goes back to an artist where you have this pressure just to entertain. So we don't have only to make the work, now we have to also to entertain.
Right.
So,
Actually, at City Hall Park, at one point I saw there was when the clown was sleeping on the bench, there was a cop. And normally if someone's sleeping on a bench, they decide, do I hassle this guy or not, make him move on like it's a bum or something. But I think it's funny you mentioned protection. It's like, well, you're not going to wake up the clown. He's a clown. He's not But you're not supposed to sleep on the benches at City Hall Park. Meanwhile, he still was entertaining because there were all these tourists taking lots of photographs of him, and he seemed completely disinterested. So entertaining but not meaning to.
I mean, entertaining but not engaging. So
But I think that's probably one of the things the person's told. They're not to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, a prohibition. But it makes me think back to when you were not having art as a child, but you said the big event was once a year, the circus came to your town. So maybe, I didn't want to...
I mean, we cannot escape childhood, right? So whatever base it's given there, it will just multiply by age.
Yeah.
So this one circus became a big circus.
Yeah. And that's also interesting that I forgot about, which is that the clowns are titled the days of the week, which becomes, again, part of what you do in this. The object's a marker in time, and it has this relationship to the days, the weeks, the month, and this passage of time. It's very unexpected that a clown would represent a day of the week.
Human time is one measurement, but of course there's the life of a tree, there's the life of beings.
Yeah.
As we always look time projected to us, but it's very relative. Huh?
Well,
when I cast a 2,000-year-old olive tree that's engaging completely different with time than, say, a date of a painting.
Well, even with the suns and designating specific points in time, I liked your response because I asked you, well, how could it be how could the sun be there at that time? And I think you said, well, you could travel around the world and you could keep following the movement of the sun. And so the day would just go on all the way around the world.
The sun never sets, right?
Right,
It's just an illusion. So.
right. I'm not sure what else we're supposed to talk about. We talked about the whole show. What haven't we talked about?
Maybe there's some questions.
I would hope so, but... Which one? I know that's a little confusing, is it? But it's really leading to the room.
That's how those children drawings were presented, and I didn't have the big space here to present it this way. But you would always be confronted with a very cold concrete structure without an entrance, and the cube was elevated so children could just move in, go underneath and see it, and that's how it. So that's what you would see inside.
That's on the inside. It's like the sun rose
Right.
in 200 ways. Someone else? Nobody else? Yeah, all the way in the back.
Hi, I'm just curious, what species of vine did you use to cast the sun sculptures? Do you know? Did you use any particular kind, like olive or grape? What kind of?
No, it's a wine.
Okay, just okay.
You said wine, the grape.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that's why I say they're dormant. Someone else?
Congratulations on the show. It's amazing. It's really beautiful. The museum looks clean and sharp, and the lighting is, they say that you selected the cold fluorescent lights, which is, there's a little irony to like the complete opposite of what the sun is, you know? Like,
I mean, I was imitating daylight. I don't like spots or shadows in a show. I just like it to see it the way I saw it when I did it. And I think once you start with lighting system, it becomes a theater. And I think you should see art as pure as possible. So good lighting is a part of it.
Someone else? Yes.
Did you leave your village of 6,000 people when you went off to college? When did you leave?
I lived early on. I was assisting an artist in near Vienna, Hermann Nietzsche, for a year, and that brought me to the academy in Vienna where I studied. But my parents are still there in the small village in Brunnen, so I do see them 2 or 3 times a year.
what age were you there?
I left with 18 then. Yeah.
I didn't know you were an assistant for Hermann Nietzsche. I guess you have to
I'm that
start
old,
somewhere.
right? So
He's like a complete 180 degrees opposite of your work.
So Hermann Nietzsche is an artist, a Viennese actionist, and he was famous for this one performance group that he still continue, called Mysterium. What's this called now? Mysterium
Origin?
Theater, Mysterium Orgy Theater.
And very
So
visceral,
as an
bloody.
18-year-old, it was very exciting to find out what's about. Right? So, but there were not actually orgies there, but...
Someone else? Anyone on the back?
I was wondering what inspired you when you were working on the Nevada project that was on the highway between Vegas and LA?
You're right. I did a previous sculpture group, which I called Human Nature, in the city. I was asked to do a project at the Rockefeller Center, and I decided to use the most basic and ancient material, stone, and keeping them raw and showing the human figure in that raw, with those raw material. And that time I was asked to do something in the desert, so I wanted to use the same material, but with in contrary air, by painting those stones so they look artificial or like plastic. So it would, because there is a movement in the 70s of land art, and those works camouflaged their work with the landscape, and I wanted to do the contrary by popping them out in the landscape. At least you can find it. Because, I mean, there are some land art historical works, they are hard to find because they just
No.
blend in with nature.
No 60s, 70s earth artists use fluorescent colors. That's for sure. Someone else? Yes.
Do you work alone, or do you have a whole group of collaborators, and you just bring the ideas and they do the execution, or how does your process work?
It depends. If it needs a hand touch, then I do it myself. And if it's like those airbrush painting, they look mechanical, I don't want to do them. I know how to do them in the beginning, but I wouldn't continue doing them. So I can just give the template and they're doing it. So it depends. So if it needs, I like to work with clay, and I leave those finger marks in. So that's something I like to do myself, whenever it needs a certain touch.
Yes.
Were you personally involved in placing your sculptures and the artwork in the Marciano Foundation in Los Angeles?
Yes. I mean, of course, that's a private foundation, a private collector. He accumulated in a certain time few works of mine, and he gave me the freedom to organize them for that space.
Someone else? Uh-oh.
I mean, now those sculptures, they are called still lifes, and that's what it is, a still life. And the two pairs are called two pairs. And so it's really something banal that I like to combine with those, which I think more spiritual work of those sun paintings. So I like just this, to pair them together, right? The ordinary and the extraordinary. But love letters, in that sense, I believe we are celebrating life with art. I mean, that if I would give myself a sense why I'm doing art, so I would say that to celebrate life, that's maybe the thread that goes through the work. And you mentioned the exhibition that I did for John Giorno, my husband, who sits here, who is a poet, and who is a source of inspiration. So, and through all his generation, he collaborated with artists, and he organized his archive since '62 very well in boxes, and I was wondering if I can turn his archive into something visual. And that was, so that triggered that exhibition that was shown in New York in 13 institutions, where you could experience a poet's life or an Italian-American immigrant's life. It was multiple things that John, as a figure, would embrace. And it had the I Heart John Jones, so it had this I Heart New York logo in it.
I think we have time for a last question or one or two, if there's one, or if there isn't one. Okay.
So last night, the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra, the choir of children or teenagers that were here, they were singing a composition written by our education fellow, Anthony Madonna. How do you feel about seeing your work, what is that word? Like ekphrastic responses to your work, other mediums that respond to work?
I mean, specific, this piece was very moving to hear that, and to know that they were inspired by this painting. It was very moving, and it's the best you can ask for if the youth is inspired doing something.
Thanks, Ugo. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks for coming. And now it's the opening.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.